This is Film Tang.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.
Oh, I don't know if it's on, but I like it.
You know, we're sitting here like a couple of regular fellas.
We're going to make film history.
Can you say that again? Just the way you said it.
Poor baby is starting to lose their head.
They won't know what they're looking at or why they like it, but they'll know they want it.
It's not bro time, it's show time. Are you guys ready?
Hello there again, everyone. Welcome in to episode 208 of Film Tank. Alex Diekman here, along with Nick Cheney.
Hello. I'm angry.
The Kool-Aid Man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's good to have you here, bud.
Thank you.
Also, Toussaint Egan
Not guilty.
has joined us. He knows.
Objection.
I was gonna say Toussaint knows what to tell the officer. That's good. Jesus. Jesus Christ. I did not see that squirrel.
Wow. Oh my god. It's gonna haunt me for the rest of my fucking life.
Deep cut.
Yeah, that's a deep cut. That's part of the Film Take lore.
Yeah.
It's true.
Of course, you remember that we were watching Tucker and Dale vs. Evil that
Oh,
evening.
of course I remember that.
When that man drove into your car because of the squirrel and knocked your car into someone else's yard.
Yep, night of my birthday.
Oh, nuts.
Night of my birthday.
Yep.
I like that. That's good stuff. In addition to the regular three amigos, our friend Sam is here with us.
Hey.
Hey.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us, as always.
You're welcome.
And I'm
Thank
really
you.
happy because it's taken, I don't know how many times you've been on, maybe like 10, 11, whatever it's been. But we did not do the knocking bit, which I'm really proud of us that we've finally gotten past that, at least for one episode.
Me too.
Stop looking at me like that.
Well, you're the one who does it, so.
Yeah.
So the film we are going to be discussing on this very episode, as Nick just handed me the physical Criterion copy that we just viewed.
I come prepared.
That's good because we actually watched this
That's right.
disc that you have here.
And if you hadn't, we wouldn't have been able to do this episode.
That
So
is
thanks.
true.
Yeah. So the film we're talking about is a classic from 1957, and it is 12 Angry Men. The original film version, at least, directed by Sidney Lumet, who did films either in 6 or 7 different decades. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, he from the 50s all the way up until before the... you know what? I said it off the podcast. I'm going to say it on the podcast.
Okay.
We have now randomly done Sidney Lumet's, as of this episode at least, first film with 12 Angry Men, and his last film with Before the Devil Even Knows You're Dead. So what a wide berth of a career.
I was going to say, clearly the world and the filmmaking that he was doing was in a different place.
Yeah, but just like Scorsese, he adapts, he goes with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't make Marvel movies.
Well, I don't think he makes Marvel movies anymore because I think he passed away. So.
Well, yeah.
Look, they're bringing
Those
James
are
Dean
facts.
back from the dead.
That is
Anything
true.
is possible.
We're going to get a Sidney Lumet directed movie with some CGI.
That doesn't make
A
any sense.
CGI director.
Grand Moff Tarkin will also be making an appearance.
Ooh.
This is all just awful.
This is the state of the world we're living in.
Yeah.
Toussaint.
Unfortunate.
It's really sad
It
when
is.
a conversation that I've had regularly, I think with Nick and also other people, and I'm assuming that most major movie stars have done this, but I really hope they've all copyrighted their likeness.
No,
Yeah,
they haven't.
I will actually say on this podcast, because we've had this conversation on the podcast, especially between you and you and myself.
You and my
Alex.
son.
You. where you have said this explicitly, that from our talks from the days of Jeff Bridges and Tron Legacy all the way to, Marvel doing de-aging with Robert Downey or Kurt Russell or whatever, and especially the Star Wars and whatnot, that there would come a day in which a person from, and you had cited like Marlon Brando, whatnot, but no, man, like, that's what's eerily prescient about what you had said, is that not only were you pretty much dead on, but it was actually in the fucking lifetime of this podcast. And it's not so much that I never thought it would come, I just didn't think it was going to come within like the next 5 years.
I mean, we don't need to talk about it really that much, and I know there was de-aging done and not just CGI of people, although I'm really not sure about Edward Furlong and what happened there. But,
in Terminator.
Yeah, but I was gonna say the CGI in the beginning of Terminator: Dark Fate is pretty fucking good.
It is good, and I will give it that. But at least in there, I don't feel grossed out because that's a property trying to play with its own history. But what you have explicitly stated in the past was that you believe that there would come a day in which somebody would just be casted, a dead actor, in a movie that had nothing to do with them, their career, or anything like that, and that they would play a full-fledged character. And that is certainly what the headlines of today has suggested, with James Dean being casted in a Vietnam drama.
And
oh boy,
who's gonna do mocap?
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis. Andy Serkis will play the role of the understudy of James Dean.
I love how the family of James Dean, whatever the estate, whatever, has said, like, we're so excited that this will be his 4th film. I'm like, nope.
Stop.
Definitely it won't be. Like, I actually don't even, like, I don't hold anything against them for agreeing to it, whatever. I more am just pissed that it, like,
it's happening.
Director would actually want this, so to speak. Yeah. But to say this will be his 4th film, nope. That's not how acting works.
But Nick, who are you to deny this director if he
a
wants
white
to cast,
male?
If he wants to have James Dean in his film, what if he wants to have James Dean in his film? What if he wants to have
then
Kevin
get the porn
Spacey
star
in his
named
film?
James Dean. I don't really
what
care.
If he wants to have,
I just love the tone.
I actually did think all the headlines were about the porn star who, unfortunately, is not a good person.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
I just love
it. Did take me a while to actually connect the dots, which is really sad. That says a lot about where my head is at with the current state of cinema and where my interests lie, and to, I guess, my knee-jerk reaction to people actually wanting to do shit like this.
Yeah, the story, I just keep coming back to this. I've had to come back to it a few times today, and when we discussed it earlier, the idea that we thought about different. Boy, we just had to do James Dean. It was like, no, you didn't.
This.
Yeah, yeah, research. Like the idea that that's the quote. It's like, so what did you do before landing on this? Apparently, every actor living was not good enough, and we're like, you know what? Fuck it, we're going live with CGI. It's just
Tom Hardy was not good enough. So
well, that I understand.
Just in general, that's a good idea to skip that, especially in a
see him in Legend.
We saw that in the theater.
We did. I actually saw on HBO Go when I was browsing through their movies. I saw the little picture they used for it because I was like, Legend, what is that? And I saw that of them in the limo.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh boy, that's a real movie.
Yep. No, we saw it in the theater. It was great. It's not a good film.
No.
So, 12 Angry Men, a film that Sam suggested that we do an episode on, and when we come to your turn, I'll definitely hope you'll give us and the audience a little background on why you chose this particular film.
Good job, Sam.
But in addition to being directed by Sidney Lumet, this film stars Henry Fonda. And I'll just name off all of the angry white people in this movie, which are Lee J. Cobb, Martin Balsam, John Fiedler, E.G. Marshall, Jack Klugman, there's a name. Edward Binns, that's a name right there for you. Let me tell you.
These are all names.
Oh, yeah, these are real actors. Although Edward Binns was in quite a few things over the years, including...
Genuinely, this was a who's who at the time.
At the time.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking about even just years after this. He was in The Verdict and also the movie Patton.
What's his name? One of the other two were in The Verdict as well.
Oh, okay.
I want to say E.G. Marsh. No, Jack Warden.
Oh, okay.
Jack Warden was.
Jack
yeah.
Warden, who plays the only...
Which was directed by Sidney Lumet, so it makes sense.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
Jack Warden, definitely the pacifist of the group here, who I always remember from both The Replacements and Dirty Work, unfortunately.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Those are.
I remember him in The Replacements. I don't know, but I've seen like Dirty Work from like start to finish.
Oh, you don't need to.
Yeah.
But
we're talking about the what do you call it?
the Norm Macdonald
Norm
film.
Macdonald. Yeah. Okay.
He also was in The Great Muppet Caper.
Oh.
Those are always fun.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, it's
That's
good.
one
No, you're not
that
going to break my
Alex
balls
liked.
over that, but you're going to break my balls over Christmas Vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean that's just
it's just another
staple.
Muppet movie.
Yeah.
Christmas Vacation's like
You said you had never
requirement.
seen a Muppet movie. That would be the equivalent of saying you've never heard of Christmas
I
Vacation.
mean, I've seen Muppet Treasure Island.
Okay, there you go.
That's it.
Yep, that's all you had to do.
That's it.
I had the...
Hey, but he only saw Muppet Treasure Island because he wanted to see Tim Curry's performance.
That's actually true.
Which is a good point.
I loved
Honestly,
Tim
that's
Curry
an,
when I was a kid.
that's an underrated one. It's not like Muppets in Space, which
Great,
is like
though.
just genuinely
He was like
bad.
my favorite villain in everything. Yeah.
I used to have the CD-ROM, the PC game of Muppet Treasure Island.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah,
played
there
those
was a
games.
there was a really fun moment when you have to like clean the ship's window or something like that, and you basically I can't remember if you used a sponge or Rizzo the Rat as the sponge,
Ah.
but it was something along those lines.
Reminds me of those old Jumpstart games that I used to play.
Yes.
Weren't those great?
I distinctly remember those.
Yeah,
And,
so
Played the shit out of
this
those.
is
Barley
getting
Spy
very,
as well.
very off
Anyway.
topic.
Sorry.
But the
Yeah, Mom.
going back, and I haven't really watched them lately, but I've just thought about specific things regarding some of the dialogue in the Muppet movies, which obviously are clearly made for children. Just even though I am well aware that she's a pig, just the shaming of Miss Piggy is
Well, yeah, that's
Ooh,
the whole
boy.
gimmick.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's awful. That character always gets a short ship. I don't necessarily take umbrage with the way I would say the characters treat her, because I kind of buy the collective exasperation, but I do take umbrage with the way people talk about her as if we should conflate our own opinions with the way Kermit treats her, or like I always found it to be a kind of at least slightly comedic rapport where we are kind of supposed to think that Kermit's a dick, and so are the other people.
Well, I'm specifically because we're talking about Muppet Treasure
Yes.
Island, thinking of both of them. I think they're like going to be.
Well, I think Miss Piggy's playing a character in that movie.
Even worse for that then. But they're both like about to be skewered, I think, or they're both maybe hanging from somewhere, and like the rope or the stick she's hanging from is like breaking a lot faster than Kermit's is. And again, I know she's a pig, but I don't know.
Succulent.
It just hasn't aged well. Moving on.
Was it in the Joker episode that I sang the Robin the Frog song halfway down the stairs?
Absolutely.
The poem based
You
on
did.
the the Winnie
Yeah.
the Pooh creator. Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember when
It was either that or that last episode that we did.
So yeah, Sam, when you listen, if you listen to the
I
Joker
do.
episode, you'll hear me sing Robin the Frog.
It may
song.
have also
I'm so
been.
excited.
You may have to listen to the episode me and Nick just did on the Loved Ones, because I think it may have been that. I'm not positive.
It would have been weird if I just did it for you, though, because we were the only two people. Well, I mean, I would do it for you in private, but...
In addition to Jack Warden and the other gentlemen I've already named, Joseph Sweeney, Ed Begley, George Voskovich, and also Robert Weber. Now that's a man's name right there. Robert Weber. That's good.
None
So
of the
binary.
others were.
What was that? I'm sorry?
None of the others were.
No, they
Yeah.
all sounded like pussies. So 12 angry men surrounds a jury holdout as he attempts to prevent a miscarriage of injustice by forcing his colleagues to reconsider evidence.
It was almost perfect.
What a summary.
It was almost perfect, if not for that word.
All the summaries are written by the people who write reviews about Watchmen, so it's great. It's fantastic.
You don't like miscarriage?
I get.
What do you have against miscarriage?
I get the phrase and how it works as a miscarriage of justice. It doesn't work.
It's a weird phrasing.
It's a really weird phrasing, and
it hasn't aged well.
It carries. It's an object in and of itself more so than the actual description of the film. You know what I mean? Like it just overpowers that sentence, and really, it just like
that word stuck out to me too,
right.
A little bit too much.
Right. I don't remember many.
Would you say that Henry Fonda's character performs an abortion of justice?
No, I would not.
Okay.
I would not say that.
It's a good thing I asked that.
I guess
would
it is.
not have wanted that to be implied.
All right. Anyway,
I'm really glad that we are clearing all this up before the actual review.
I just want to get this all out in the open.
Very important.
That's great.
That's
we're just going over all the evidence.
I was going to say it's best just having like a pre-talk, maybe an early vote.
Yeah. This isn't going to make it to the real podcast, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. What?
Anyway,
did you disagree with me, sir?
No.
Thanks. That's the right answer. Yeah. This is before they had metal detectors, I guess, to go into the courthouse.
Oh, hell yeah.
It was a more trusting time.
I was going to say.
Well, when you're white.
This juror literally brought a knife to his jury duty. So that was kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
That's okay. So who wants to go first? Oh, wow.
Oh.
All the hands just flying up at once.
Well, I just thought maybe people were going to like jump at it, so I didn't want to, but...
Well, if nobody says nothing, then everyone just votes, positively, and we all can go to the baseball game. So that's good.
Well, I am a hung juror, so...
Hey. Sorry. So who's going first?
I'll go.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
How's that?
Let's go.
So the reason I had suggested this one was my boyfriend and I were watching. Actually, we caught a portion of this on TV, and he had seen it before, and I had not seen it yet. And I was intrigued because just some of the rhetoric that was taking place. It was the moment where a lot of the gentlemen were starting to switch their to change their minds to not guilty, and it sort of became a like, oh, I kind of want to see how this plays out now. And I had suggested it as well, just because I wasn't sure how many kind of classics, if you will, or sort of like black and white films. You guys had done.
No, that's been one of our goals of the year. So,
and I know we had talked about it on previous podcasts of like kind of, and I know Alex and I have had conversations about it too of what sort of films do we want to expand to, and things like that. If I've had any like films that I've watched that that are a little bit older or things like that to bring up. I know I had brought up Beetlejuice the one time.
Oh yeah.
So a little bit aged as well. And
it's before I was born.
Oh no, I just don't think Beetlejuice is a very good film. So we've covered this. So
if you want to hear all of our thoughts on that, you should check out our Beetlejuice episode.
Go back and listen to the episode
at Film Tank.
Yes.
Thank you for
Beetlejuice.
Anyway,
please continue.
Anyway, so I suggested this film on behalf of him and everything like that. But I think that there's a very interesting cultural aspect to this film, especially in today's context, and even just bringing it into light in our current times as well.
Things have come to light. I'm sorry.
It's especially when, so it's 12 white dudes in a room talking about the fate of a man, even though the film is in black and white, who is colored.
Yeah.
And there's for lack of a better term, interesting opinions that each of the men hold.
Very spicy takes, if you will.
Yes, that is the best way to phrase it.
Very spicy takes.
Oh, it's a hot day.
I mean,
hot
they
day.
shunned a man in the corner because he was being extremely racist.
Yeah, you're not supposed to say it out loud. That was the whole thing.
That basically was.
He said it out loud, and that's why we're not talking to you.
Yaw, gee.
It's impolite.
Yeah, he pretty much had to go like wear a dunce cap in the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He should have put one of those paper cups on his head.
Yes.
Made a makeshift dunce cap. We were talking about the fucking cups for like a good 10 minutes.
We were, though.
Well, it is a little unfortunate that they had to use those just terrible little triangle cups.
What are you supposed to do with those cups? You can only hold on to them. You cannot put them
Now, hold
down
on. You can
anywhere.
barely hold on to
And
them.
again,
they
they're-
don't fit comfortably
No.
into your hand.
They're
The
gonna-
only
most
thing
of
you can
the
do is
time.
drink
It
them as
slips
fast as
out.
you
Oh my
can.
god, guys, stop
and then
talking about
use
the
them
fucking cups.
as fake cone boobs.
No, we
Like,
need
that
to
is-
air this out, okay?
Absolutely. I mean, again, they're going to fall
Why do you think they're so fucking angry?
These cups are going to fall apart if you let water sit in them for probably more than about 16 seconds. Like they're not made to last.
Almost like the verdict that these people are coming to.
Slipping through their fingers.
Oh, Sam?
Sam.
Way to bring it back.
I was going to say.
But I think some of the camera angles and the cinematography are interesting, especially or even beyond that, the blocking that occurs and the way that the men are sort of arranged within the room, and even like in some of the camera shots of the way that they're organized to be able to see very clearly each person. Sometimes in like crowd scenes or in group scenes, you often see that someone is obstructed somehow. But in a lot of these scenes, you could see people so well. And I kind of kept thinking whether or not that was some sort of statement about individuality and the individuality within opinions and things like that as well. But something else that stuck out was sort of like the profiling shots of, kind of within the frame, it's just the face. And it's very much like a portrait, which is a very interesting sort of commentary, I guess, of sort of... I kept thinking back to like The Office of like interviewing them to know like more about their personal opinion about matter.
The one guy, and I was joking about it, but he really did look like, at least for a couple small milliseconds, like he was like trying to hold back from looking into the camera.
So I will say about that guy though, really quickly, is that he is technically seated directly across the row from juror number 8.
Right.
So technically, he does have a reason to look straight across. No, I just mean as far as like continuity of.
Right.
So I kind of agree with you in that it's a weird angle because obviously compared to all the other ones, they can kind of go at a side or at a glance. But at least there's I would say an inter-universe reason as to why he'd be looking straight ahead.
Oh yeah, it just from the actual context of what he was saying at the time, it just came off as a little preachy.
Yeah.
But, Please continue.
Aside from that sort of stuff, I also think that the content is fairly interesting as well, especially the way that you watch minds evolve, if you will, and the sort of, in some cases, peer pressure of opinions and sort of watching the stakes of determining another man's fate is a lot of times there's difficulty in sort of making a decision or it is not taken as heavy-handed as it should be sometimes, which I thought was a very interesting take within this, especially when you think about the era that this was created in, both filmed as well as written and performed in. But sort of kind of taking a step back to I guess, highlight, if you will, some, I don't know what the word is.
Notable points.
Yeah. I think that's the best way of putting it. So yeah.
Okay.
That's my overarching hot take for a moment.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll go next.
Already?
Yeah. It's been a couple of
1 week since you looked.
Yeah, I was about to say it too, then I stopped. Thanks,
I was
man.
gonna say like Rose in Titanic. It's been 84 years.
Bare Naked Ladies is like my favorite group, so I'm not just doing that randomly.
Okay.
Alex can attest to that.
Yeah.
They're one of Nick's favorite groups. We saw them in concert earlier this year.
Damn.
It literally happened, and they are a bunch of guys who are
Bare naked.
well, it's a good thing they weren't.
They're past their prime.
I was going to say they are no longer in the prime of their career.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
fine.
But they, really quickly, I just want to say this because everyone shits on them. They at least earnestly love what they do and don't really expect much else out of just being, very good ladies. So
That's pretty cool.
they
Yeah,
don't have an ego. Let's put it that way.
yeah, they all look like Kevin McAllister's father. So
Damn.
Hey, on that
Life
night,
comes at you fast.
we saw Bare Naked Ladies and Hootie and the Blowfish, and I think you would agree with me that Hootie and the Blowfish had the most embarrassing moment of the night.
Hootie and the Blowfish.
It was a decent concert, but
yeah.
the ending of their concert when Darius Rucker sang or gave a cover of "Fight the Power,"
Yeah.
that was uncomfortable.
Well, especially we're just talking about this.
That makes me feel uncomfortable just hearing about it secondhand.
Okay. First of all, is someone who has seen Public Enemy actually
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
in concert before, and not that makes it any different, but seeing Chuck D actually perform that, and then seeing Darius Rucker fight the power.
No!
And
if
then,
you let him cry, fight the power.
And actually, I think it was when that started, and it was pretty late in the concert, and we were playing to leave
that
before the
accelerated
encore.
it.
I was gonna say when they started
We need to
playing
get the
that.
fuck out of here.
There wasn't even really a verbal of anything. Me and Nick just both started walking towards the exit.
Chugged and then went. Okay, we're good.
Yeah. So, anyways, unfortunately, there were these two, for sure, baby boomer old white women walking in front of us who were dancing and shaking their booties to that performance, and that is just so unfortunate. So, especially again, being looking at each other, being like, "Yeah, fight the power." It's like, oh, have fun back at your ranch. We'll see you later. God. Tucson.
Okay. So, anyway, it's been a couple of years
We're like
since...
Hootie and the No Fish.
It's been a couple of years since I've seen this film. I'm pretty sure I first saw it when I was in high school, and I might have actually read along with a couple of the scenes for one of my theater courses when I was in high school. I remember enjoying it from back then, and I really enjoyed it, returning to it after many, many years. It's an impeccably well-written film. I think it's a very well-acted film. I can't remember the name of the characters, but I do know their juror designations. I mean, the protagonist, juror number 8, he's awesome. And juror number 3, who is basically the last holdout, he gives a really, powerful antagonistic performance that it just feels, terribly and tragically plausible that somebody would just, hang on to something that bitter just for the sake of...
By the end of it, that is way more personal
yeah.
and pathetic than it is, shall we say,
I just
hot button racism.
Yeah,
so to
the other
Yeah.
guy who got sent into the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a lot more personal than just their fucking Breitbart racism. Yeah. What's really fascinating about this film to me is that in the middle of it, well, I want to ask Nick a quick question. It's
yes.
Where would you rank this film among some of your favorite films?
Oh boy. Well, recently I've been kind of stepping away from ranking, but it is
Not necessarily a rank, but
right.
What would you
But
describe
this
it
is
as?
in my top tier in the sense that I put it in my list of favorite films of all time.
I could see that.
I would say it's in my top 100.
Yeah,
for
I could.
sure.
I could totally see why this would be one of your favorite films of all time, just because it is a single closed room, and
this is the granddaddy of them all.
I feel like
pretty much.
this epitomizes what is the main appeal of this, because it is just a powder keg of like not just people, but also of ideas, of backgrounds, of classism. It's this sort of like very heated struggle between not necessarily justice, but due process. The sort of mental, emotional, intellectual labor that due process necessitates versus the sort of like steep, easy decline of groupthink. It's like due process versus groupthink. Like it's so easy. Like none of these men actually stopped to think before they voted, with the exception of maybe one person who had not necessarily like a open and shut like rebuttal, but just had an inkling that like shouldn't this take a little bit longer?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we think a little bit longer on this before we sentence a person
Now,
to death?
I will say, I've got to call a little bit of bullshit on his delivery. And again, I'm not necessarily...
You're talking like at the beginning when he's trying to lay out like
Yes.
why he would even do
Yeah,
that.
and I will say that
He's a real rabble rouser. Let me tell ya.
so obviously he was attempting to sway the room.
Yeah. He's
but
an architect. He's a real Ayn Rand type. No, I don't mean that.
Well, someone does call him out on it in the bathroom when he
Right.
says like, "Do you know what a soft cell is?"
Yeah,
So
but he is definitely early on saying, I don't really think, I don't necessarily think he's innocent. And then just 15 minutes later, I brought this knife. And it's like, wait a minute. You brought fucking props to this shit? Like, clearly he was much more passionate about it than he was letting on.
Yeah.
So
Clearly, he was thinking about this longer
but
than just
I don't think
like, the
anyone would
duration.
have listened to him if he had came out.
I don't either.
guns a-blazing.
I don't either, but I feel like a weird part about the film is I feel like some of his actions at the beginning feel more genuine to me, so it makes it a little confusing that he did have that surprise witness knife in his pocket.
I think that by the end of the film, it's obviously it's not just him who's arguing it, but it's like there's a lot of points that would not have come to light and would have like maybe exonerate. They don't necessarily exonerate, but they build up to a beyond a reasonable doubt. In the case of this young man's like trial, like if him actually being at fault for this, like being guilty, and like I think about juror number 10 who asks about the glasses, which just seems like such a crucial soft point, an ambient point that you would otherwise not have even thought of. It's so just interesting to see how these different personalities like play off of one another, is like especially when you sort of unravel and unspool their reasonings behind why they're voting the way that they do. Like initially when everybody's voting guilty and be like, oh, these slum kids and stuff like that, and one person finally takes exception to that and he's like, wait a minute, I grew up in the fucking slums. And I'm just like, well, it's not personal. It's like, well, I take it personally.
Well,
like,
then, ironically, though, what he's saying is technically true because what he means is it's not white. Like, no, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
and that's what becomes very tied up into their, arguments, so to speak.
yeah, it's. I like this film a lot. I think that it's very well written. I think that as a product of its time, it also does not necessarily like tackle like the idea of lived experiences and like sort of like the loaded assumptions that come into like those lived experiences. The fact that they're all like either white or light-skinned men.
I would say the fact that they're all white men is both the best and worst thing about this.
Yeah.
Because it genuinely, I mean, not just...
No.
But,
no.
like,
Yeah.
just to go with that is that it is on the one hand, kind of an actual unfortunate representation
Right.
of a power
Right.
structure that does exist, and then also, of course,
I
not
think inadvertently
represented.
that is an asset to it. Like, it just shows just how
It's
glaring...
something that can totally be criticized as well as kind of works in the film's favor, depending on what mood
Right.
you're in.
I don't think it was intentional, but I do think that it plays inadvertently to the strengths of like what the film is talking about, like
And to
by no
kind
fault of itself.
Yeah.
To kind of take it even a step further, looking at the jobs that all of those men work, as compared to where the court case is coming from, and kind of seeing the. I know one of the gentlemen, I can't remember which one, but he mentions he's a broker.
Yeah.
You have an architect. You've got,
He's an advertiser.
yeah,
drawing
marketing
rice pops.
and you see a lot more white collar. It's a white collar, white male representation within that room.
Yeah.
I think that it's a extraordinarily well done film. I think that I really enjoyed like watching it. Like even knowing what's going to happen at the end, I was just like, yeah, this is really. I think everybody who went in that room and came out of that room, they'll probably never meet each other again, but they came out maybe just a little bit wiser, if not better, for the experience.
Oh.
The more you know.
The more you know. And you know what? That's kind of how I felt after having watched that film. So, yeah. Those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
I very much love this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously, as Tucson pointed out, very much right up my alley. It's the whole single setting pressure cooker type structure is my bread and butter, and so obviously this is the granddaddy of all kind of single setting movies or just stories in general. And what I really think about this movie that I think is kind of underappreciated in this day and age is that you have to remember that this script started as a teleplay for a television show, which was Studio One on CBS, because during the 50s and 60s, 50s in particular, one of the most common types of programming on across the networks was live plays, which we're kind of seeing a resurgence of in this day and age, but also exclusively musical, which is weird. It's weird to see a resurgence of something, but also to do the most technically hardest thing of them instead of just starting small with more grounded plays or whatnot. But anyway, but you had things back in the 50s like Studio One, which this debuted as, or Playhouse 90 and whatever, and those hosted just a wide variety of amazing programs. Of you had people cutting their teeth like Rod Serling of the Twilight Zone fame, and who wrote a great script, and other people who both acted and behind the camera. It was just like a training ground for just wonderful concertos of drama for the American public, and especially to watch it live. And 12 Angry Men was one of the seminal works that got debuted on Studio One. And I think you kind of get that vibe when you watch Sidney Lumet's film adaptation of it. And which is to say that it is a very small film, and I don't just mean that obviously in the fact that it's a single location, but the direction of it is, I would say, very out of the way, because even though there are some really grandiose movements and shots, like the opening when they first go into the jury room, that's an unbroken shot almost of about 5 to 10 minutes, where we really get to go around the entire room without cutting to another angle, as we get to meet these jurors and the way that they carry themselves before they start to deliberate. But other than that, it's a mostly, I would say, extremely controlled but meticulous way of presenting this drama, because it lets the characters and the actors obviously do their bit, and it lets these ideas stand for themselves. And I think it's all the better for that. And it's actually one of the better examples. There's a movie called Marty, which it's funny because 12 Angry Men did not win. I don't even know if it was nominated, but it definitely didn't win Best Picture from the Oscars the year it was, whatever. But another movie that did win Best Picture is actually not as good as its teleplay debut from Playhouse 90, which is Marty. And the movie starred, I want to say, Ernest Borgnine and the... I forget who played the original in the teleplay, but that was a much better version of that story, so to speak. Whereas Sidney Lumet kind of understood exactly what the story was and how to stretch it out to a 90-minute feature, so to speak, because these programs were generally about 50 minutes with advertisements and whatnot. And what I love about this particular incarnation of 12 Angry Men is that it doesn't really betray its roots in television. We clearly get what would be considered commercial breaks when we have these interludes when the people go, or the men go to the bathroom or kind of take a moment in between deliberating. And those are actually often the most telling moments of this movie. There's a great scene toward the end where I think Jack Warden's character turns the fan on, and he realizes that he could have turned the fan on the entire time, but because the electrical switch for the lights had not been switched, there was no electricity running. And it's at that moment where he's more gobsmacked and delighted that he's figured this out, that you kind of realize that the entire justice system rests upon human beings,
a bunch of fucking idiots,
and that's how disturbing this whole thing is, and yet we don't get those kind of passive moments in the teleplay. So this is one of those instances in which I think moving to the feature, to the silver screen, totally benefited this story. Even though I can understand why someone wouldn't want this drawn out because it's kind of a simple story or whatever. But I will say at the end of the day that I absolutely love this movie. I love this story. I love these characters, at least in the way that they battle for their ideals and whatnot. And the thing that I don't get hung up on, which I don't blame someone for, but I also just don't really buy into, is the idea that, like, at the end of the day, like Henry Fonda's character, juror number 8, obviously he's on a crusade of trying to sway the juries and whatnot to give this another look and whatnot. And if we just go by common sense, like, we can ask ourselves, like, is that an actual worthwhile cause if it actually kind of does seem like the evidence piles up against it? And I'm not trying to get into...
that question was even floated in the restroom where it's just like, well, what if you go to all this trouble to exonerate this kid and it turns out he actually did it?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a worthwhile question, though. Like, even after the movie ends, like, I don't personally subscribe to the idea that once the movie ends, justice was served. I think when the movie ends, it's kind of uncomfortably ambiguous because we're not given an answer, and we are left with the idea that even something as well-meaning as this kind of crusade
if I can use a really poor analogy...
Please use a poor one, though. Not a good one.
Thanks.
It has to be very bad.
Okay, it is. So anyways...
I believe you.
Thank you. If you watch the NFL, mostly... I mean, there's other sports that have reviews for plays that are questionable.
Yes.
And there are actually 3 possible outcomes. There are the call...
stands, reverses...
Yeah, I mean, the call... Well, I guess there's 2 outcomes, sorry.
Oh.
The call... No, wait. There's 3. I'm sorry. I should have just stick with me, but I was kind of gotten all flubbed up there. Anyways,
threw the brick in the air.
There are thanks. There are 3 possible outcomes. The call is confirmed, the call stands, or the call is overturned. So a lot of times, and in this case, I feel like there's nobody in this story that is going out of their way to say that they know for sure that this kid is innocent.
Can you
they're
really
saying
quickly...
that they're sorry.
No, I'm just saying so that way, if someone's not a sports fan, what would be the difference between the call stands and the call is confirmed?
So if a call is confirmed, that means that they are, without a shadow of a doubt, saying that that is exactly how it happened.
Okay, I got
If a call stands, there's no for sure evidence one way or the other, but that was the way it was called on the field.
Yeah, like, we'll let you have your judgment, but we're not changing things.
Right, we're not
Okay.
changing it because we're not for sure,
All right.
and then if it's overturned, it's the other way.
Just wanted to make sure.
I mean, at least my reading of it, in the way that this progresses through, in the way the legal system is supposed to work, they're saying that they have reasonable doubt that he is not the killer, and I feel like that is something that is weirdly hard to really get a grasp around, especially in this film. Is that the eighth juror seems to be almost at times, especially early in the film, cheerleading on this idea that he is not guilty. But I feel like if you really watch the way he describes and makes his argument, at no point I feel like is he really, passionately saying this person is definitely not guilty. He's saying, I don't feel comfortable with this because a lot of this evidence is not good.
Yeah.
So
No, and I think that works, for me at least, towards its benefit, because at least, like, you had brought up the knife thing, and for me, when I watched this when I was younger, like, the knife thing was one of my favorite twists in a movie, which is not to say that it's, like, a earth-shattering twist of, like, it changes everything you think or anything like that, but...
You brought a knife to a logic fight.
Nice. But the idea that I just love the visualization of it, the literal switch blade aspect of it.
Yeah, switchblades are cool.
It is in that moment, and when he whips it out, sticks it in the table. Yeah, you're fucking disgusting. When he sticks it in the table, and literally an entire argument is kind of blown up. Considering the fact that the argument hinges on specificity and uniqueness. And I love the idea that that's reasonable doubt in a nutshell, and so the argument, in my opinion, is extremely foolproof, just within a nutshell of what he's trying to prove in that moment. So I loved that moment completely. But what I like about that moment, and what I would say about the movie in general, is that, as I had mentioned before, because it has its roots in the teleplay business with Studio One and whatnot, that what I think the reason why I think 12 Angry Men ages well, like, obviously, in some respects it might not, as far as like the rhetoric surrounding the racism or whatever, but just the general ideas at play, is that I always found this to be an extremely abstract drama about the legal system, and that while there are some great moments of, I would say little moments of condemning the legal system in general, whether it's like, I love what at one point some guy basically says, like, you already had a trial, like, what's the, like, well, no, this was part of the trial. So the idea that you think the trial is over because it's, you're now deliberating, that makes no sense. And yet I do think that is an actual common misconception of the jury's purpose or whatever. But while I agree that there are moments like that, or even the slight dig at the idea of, like, public defenders, of lawyers who maybe just want to get over with their case or whatever, in general I find this to be fascinating because I think it's a wonderful abstract piece of conflicting ideals when it comes to moral and legal debates and whatnot, and I think for that reason alone is why, whatever the outcome is, or whatever these gentlemen land on, it never really bothers me whether the person did it or not, because I find this more fascinating as a philosophical debate about the merits of a human being that never enters the equation of the conversation. And I love that in and of itself is probably the ultimate failure of our justice system, which is not to say that he obviously never gets to have his say, but he is literally, as we see, shunned from the conversation that will actually decide his fate. And while I'm not saying I can come up with a better system, there's something incredibly infallible about, that in and of itself, and I think that's ultimately where this film's strength lies. And I absolutely love the crosstalk between all of them, and as we had mentioned earlier with the one juror number 3, and how by the end it's not even that he's the most racist, because he's not. No. He's up there, but
always there.
But
he just won't say it out loud.
No, yeah, but it's more of his.
I'm just
personal...
saying what everybody else is thinking.
But it's more of his personal demons that are blinding him to what's going on here. And the idea that is both something that's kind of sympathetic in the way that you can at least kind of take pity on him, but also incredibly disheartening that can be a factor in somebody's livelihood.
That man could manifest in any courtroom of any jury.
Yeah.
Even your trial.
You joke, but there's actually a great little 3-issue arc in Tom King's run where Batman does do jury duty. I should say Bruce Wayne does.
Yeah.
And he actually...
There would be some if it was Batman.
Yeah. She's just there with the cape. Oh, we're back!
And he's got like a suit on.
Am I the only one?
Yeah.
No,
Okay, cool. But no, really quickly though, Bruce Wayne does do jury duty. I can't remember if it's I think it's Penguin, where he knows the answer to the case because he was basically there or whatever, but he's defending Oswald Cobblepot because he's pulling a juror number 8 because he's like, well, how do you guys know that he didn't do that or whatever. Anyway, it's a great 3-issue arc and I love it.
I'd like to read that.
So, there was another film actually that I was thinking about a lot.
Let's talk about that one instead.
Anyways, and it was a film that I watched for the first time. It was either last year or the year prior.
Jupiter Ascending?
You're just saying names
Close.
now. Yeah. And it is interesting that Nick brought up the idea of our legal system and the film that I am thinking about. Because the film I'm thinking about is the very bizarre, and I know it's based again on a stage production, but a very bizarre musical, which is 1776.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about that, and very much almost the exact same scenario plays out, where at the very beginning of the film, everyone is against the idea of a revolutionary war, and by the end of the film, it is unanimous that we are going to go.
Juror number 8 is such a John Adams.
God. So, anyways, it is, I think, well, that's a much different film because there's a lot of things happening there that are just extraordinarily factually inaccurate. As these guys are like literally skipping around town with their arms in arms together, just being like, "Oh, let's go find him to write the Declaration of Independence." And they're like, "Nope, that's
good."
Thank you. Whew. But at the same time, just the idea of what you were just bringing up, Nick, of a bunch of white guys or a bunch of whoever, a small amount of people deciding extreme important situations, whether it's an entire nation or it's one person. The idea of other people being the deciding factor in the fate of whatever is going on is pretty fascinating. And that was just a 2-film comparison that I was having throughout, as I thought there were a lot of little similarities that are, just in terms of structure. But this particular film, this was the first time that I've actually seen this version. And I thought it was, as everyone else on the podcast does, I thought it was quite good. One of the things I think that I really gravitated towards in this film was the cinematography was the first and foremost, I thought, just because trying to show emotions through different shots and different close-ups and different viewpoints, I thought was super fascinating. And even if you get the weird close-up right on somebody's face, and it's turned in a certain way. Also, too, the way that the camera was able to capture just sort of the almost hawk eyes that are coming from people when certain members of the jury are speaking and they are saying some shit that they are not down with, and they're just looking at it and I'm like, better not talk about him like that because that's racist. I just thought that was something that really made it easy to bring myself into the story, and also just get so much more out of this film than is just the words that are being said throughout the different characters throughout. Obviously, the performances here are all across the board pretty solid, and some of them are very, very good. Obviously, Henry Fonda is great. The guy who plays juror number 4, who is probably the most sane person on the guilty side.
Yeah, he's E.G. Marshall, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, because he's
the one with the glasses.
Yes.
And I had mentioned while we were watching that he originated the role of Willie Loman on Broadway with Elia Kazan directing the first production of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, which is crazy to me because that would be amazing to watch.
I second that.
I would third that.
Yeah.
Toussaint?
4th.
There we go.
Whoa, I fifth.
Unanimous.
The eyes have it. Well, I thought he was great, and I thought that character was also great because even though, and this is really how I feel about our current political system, so that's great.
We live in a society, man.
Yeah. I feel like there are a lot of times in real public debate and real life scenarios, as long as you come with actual analysis and actual real thought, I mean, there are people who could make good arguments for real things. And a lot of things that he was saying throughout this film seemed logical and seemed plausible, and there's a reason why any reasonable man or woman could think exactly what he's saying sounds legit. But the idea of just having real conversation about situations like this, and that it shouldn't even necessarily be just because a man's life is hanging in the balance. Like, it should be a lot of situations in life in general, or even, legal situations or life decisions, whether it's deciding to get married or deciding if you want to live with somebody or deciding if you want to purchase a home. Like, you should actually think about these type of things and
versus not at all.
Well, I mean, a lot of our current materialistic and capitalistic society is based on the idea that you shouldn't think about things. You should just pull out your card. And I'm not saying that there aren't situations when impulse buys are bad or good, because I impulse buy things a lot. But and again, when it's coming down to
a certain measure of reason,
Criterion Blu-ray,
when it's coming to making like actual decisions that affect your and others' lives, like, you actually should think about this shit.
Oh yeah,
but that's hard.
Yeah. That is correct.
That's the point.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I'm being facetious.
We are evolved humans. Like, this is supposed to be hard. You're not just supposed to sit there and click like on somebody's bullshit marathon on Facebook. Like,
so
yeah.
I will say, just to add to that.
Yeah.
Or do you want to finish, or do you want to go off?
There was only one more thing that I really wanted to mention first, and that was another comparison, and it's not exact 1-to-1. But I really thought about this film in addition to 1776 early on, and it was because of the idea of it being the hottest day and that everybody's sweating, and that is Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing.
I was thinking that, too.
Before we watched this, when we started, I was about to say, this is like if Do the Right Thing but took place in one room and it didn't let the black people in the room.
It's pretty much it. And I've got to say, a lot of
there's only one room.
A lot of it is interesting because a lot of the dismissive arguments that are made from the guilty party jurors who are not Death of a Salesman glasses man are really just that same old shit that we hear time and time again in Do the Right Thing, which is like, they just don't belong here.
They're kind of like the John Turturro of
of
that movie, where they've heard these these talking points or whatever, and they kind of buy into it, but they don't really understand why they do, and so they say it. And then logic comes around, and now obviously not all of them are necessarily swayed by that. For example, I think the old guy, even though he's shamed into the corner, I don't know that he somehow becomes not a racist. but I think his voice is deafened to the point where it becomes nonsensical.
Well, the other thing, we discussed groupthink a little bit earlier, but you have the other side of the coin of that, where the whole room is now turned against him, and now he's pretty much turned into little burned up Voldemort in the second Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, where he's just below a little bench in King Cross Station, just looking like it's not going too hot. And so that whole way that situation plays out is actually really weird, because he just kind of just without a problem just walks over to that little side table and just no problem just walks right over there and just stares into the wall. It doesn't say anything for the rest, except for like kind of sheepishly be like, not guilty.
No, see, that's where I'm completely with you, and that's where I think that this has its roots in that teleplay vibe, which is very abstract. Really quickly, there was another program, there was another drama. I can't remember the name of it, but it's got America in the title, but there was that aired on Studio One, where a classroom is the setting. It's very much like 12 Angry Men in the sense that it's most of them were one room, but especially like that, where a bunch of townspeople gather in the town's school, and they get in there, and an act of violence has occurred just basically moments before the teleplay starts, and they all discuss it and try to come up with the repercussions for what should happen. And it's very much like 12 Angry Men in the sense that we don't know the specific event that transpired, or at least the facts surrounding it, but it is a lynch mob mentality of like, if I heard this happen, then therefore this is what must happen in reaction to it. And it kind of unspools, and it kind of turns into like the monsters are due on Maple Street from the Twilight Zone, where they're almost all wrong in a sense, because they don't have the facts, and their emotional testimony has no bearing on what may or may not have happened or whatever. So I kind of, even in this movie, shall we say, adaptation of it, like that's the staging of that. I feel like that's more metaphorical than it is a literal. Now, which is not to say that it didn't happen or anything like that, but that's the mode in which I very much enjoy this representation of this story.
Yeah. So as we go into more of a discussion here, just said it's good for people to discuss things.
Hey.
I will say that I can't remember what I was going to say.
Oh boy,
I had it right there.
Do you want me to really quickly go off of the thing that I was going to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
So why don't you just go ahead and just...
So one thing you had mentioned, Alex, was the idea of groupthink and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I think that's one of the best things that has really aged well about this movie, because I was kind of scared by how much I saw myself in this film, which is, I've never been on a jury, but... confession, I get all my news from Twitter. I shouldn't.
Damn.
But I do.
Could you?
I know. And I mean that both as a mix of actual... I mean that both as a mix of actual outlets, publishing headlines, but also the editorializing tweets that... Usually I find these... I see a long list of tweets from random people that I follow, and if I follow them, that means that I must agree with them on some subconscious level.
Twitter is like an RSS feed, only with more egos and worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing, though, is that I'm surprised, and I watch a movie like this, and it really reminds me of how it's just an echo chamber for my own thoughts, which is that I see people tweeting about stories that I haven't even actually read yet. Usually that's how I find out about news stories. That I go, okay, wait, what are people tweeting about? Okay, I need to find the original, whatever. And then I read it, but I've already read the tweets in which they're reacting to. And I'll admit on this podcast that when I read their reactions, even before I get there, I'm already probably subconsciously agreeing with them. It's not like I'm reading them and going, well, I disagree. There's no way this can be true. Like, I've already cultivated a world in which, I'm only getting my news from a stream of sources that I already admire and respect in some way. And obviously, while this is not the exact same case, I think this is a good kind of metaphorical representation of the way groupthink happens, which is that, it only takes one person to say something that you can kind of see the logic in before you start to doubt everything you think, and therefore then start to follow that down the rabbit hole and only see that as the truth. Because you have a room full of men, besides juror number 8, who see a trial and see the evidence presented. And I do think the evidence, like before the deliberations happen, do point out a guilty man. I do think the defense lawyer failed, and I think the prosecutor won, so to speak, and painted a case of a guy who, quote-unquote, clearly murdered his father. So, of course, I would, myself probably, I would see that. I would agree with it. And then I go into a room and a guy is like, well, I could have the same knife as that guy. And then that, to me, felt like me reading a tweet about a news story where I was like, yeah, he could have a knife like that. Therefore, the liberal in me has to give him up. It's just this weird, I don't know, kind of acknowledgement that we're all kind of insane on the internet, myself included. And
just lean into it, buddy.
Oh yeah, and so
that's what shitposts are for.
I think that part of this movie has completely aged well. If you kind of carry it over to that kind of, I would say, what the modern day equivalent of that, which is that I feel like Twitter or just social media in general is a juror deliberation of sorts. Like, it is a bunch of people who bring their own personal biases to, we have juror number 3 who brings his own personal story or whatever. We all bring our own personal stories, our own personal subconscious racial tics, or maybe conscious racial tics, and whatnot. And then we hear the people we trust and or at the very least tolerate speak on subjects that we know nothing about, and then we take them at their word and whatnot, and we never truly carve a path for our own. And I think that's ultimately what I love about this movie, is that at the end of the day, even if I pretty much am wholeheartedly agreeing with juror number 8, I also don't know that that's the way to justice, because by the end, when he's actually going off on juror number 3, my sympathy starts to gravitate towards juror number 3, not so much for his ideas or point of view, but at a certain point, he's not affording juror number 3 the same courtesy that he was essentially asking everybody at the beginning of this deliberation, because he's now saying, well, now you have to prove yourself to all of us. And it's like, well, you didn't really do that to everybody else. You essentially just, put that little worm in everybody's brain and let it spread. And so the idea that somehow, whether I might obviously disagree with juror number 3, just because you disagree with him does not mean that, and it sounds bad, but I agree with his line that it says he's entitled to his own opinion. I mean, that is what our justice system is based on. So whatever his faults are, he's not necessarily doing anything wrong.
That's a good point.
Of that moment.
Like, juror number 8 didn't have to, fully articulate his own stances in that regard, and, neither did. I mean, I guess it's more of, framed as, after having actually deliberated and broken apart these arguments, and actually every single excuse that he has made up to this point has been sort of pushed to the wayside, what is actually left to actually condemn this person.
Well,
to
and that's
death.
the thing though is that here's the thing is, if he is truly a man of justice, so to speak, at least within this legal system, if after all that there's still a lone holdout vote, is it more justice to lean on him and try to persuade him against all out? If he didn't buy into everything that was presented to him, even if for bullshit reasons, as we kind of learn to believe or whatever, is he not going against his own word of just trying to deliberate? If he's essentially trying to say, well, why don't you agree with the 11 of us? Because at the end of the day, wouldn't he rather have a hung jury if that is more representative of the actual deliberation that took place?
I guess I see what you're saying. I think that more of like juror number 8's like abrasiveness towards the end, or more aggressiveness like towards the stance of like the holdout of like
He just looks
juror
like he's
number
going
3.
in for the kill.
For juror number 3, I think it's more of just a frustration with otherwise like bullheaded obstinance in the face of like so much that has been like if it's enough to like move anybody else in the room to doubt that, like what exactly is left to like what is actually left to like retain this sort of like heavy-handed like no, this is absolutely what it is without a shadow of doubt. Like what is the shadow of doubt then in this situation?
Well, and that's why when I look at a movie like this, I watch it and I'm like all basically in agreement with juror number 8.
Right,
and
yeah.
I go through the motions and I'm like, yep, everything you say makes sense. And then at the end of the movie, I'm like, this is how OJ got off. No, but like
It's a very fair
that's
point.
how the system works towards that end goal. You know what I mean?
We peel back the layers of the onion and
Yeah.
find some way to say, well, this could be not what he did. And it's like, well, yeah, but he also fucking did it.
Yeah,
So.
you
But,
insert a little rhyme and a little nursery rhyme into their brains, and
but-
it just
but-
like
but-
lives like a worm.
I'm not, because as time has gone on, this is not 12 dudes in a room for 4 hours or whatever it was. I mean, as time has gone on, the court of public opinion on OJ has been that he fucking did it.
Well, and I would say the court of public opinion was that even the day
Yeah.
of. I mean, as far as the public watching the trial versus the public who was in the trial.
Well, yeah. Which is, that's a whole other bag of worms if you wanted to go down that route.
But I think that's how it happens. It's
Yeah.
What I think is what's most inspiring about this movie is that it almost suggests that, it doesn't matter what, the majority says. All it takes is one person to stand up for what's right. But the insidious other side of that coin is like, okay, but if that is all it takes, then it means that we are then once again only beholden to one person's perspective of justice, which means that the system we have is fucked.
Well, I will say there are a couple jurors here that, everybody gets a vote, and welcome to our election system. And I'm not saying it's wrong, and I'm not saying
one of them makes that joke too. Literally, before they do their preliminary vote, they're like, "Oh yeah, we should elect him senator," which I actually thought was pretty good.
So there are two jurors here that are first the one played by Jack Warden, who literally does not have an opinion one way or the other because he really just doesn't want to be there. And he
wants to go to a ball game.
Okay, then
he's got tickets burning a hole in his pocket.
Burning a hole in his pocket. He wears a little pork pie hat. He makes jokes all the time. But he looks like the guy from Batman.
He's got a striped suit with a matching hat.
He's got a zoot suit on.
When pressed by the other juror, his initial response is, "I don't need to tell you," which was bullshit. And his second response, when pressed again, he sounded like Sarah Palin during her interview with Katie Couric, where she was just like, "Oh yeah, I read all those newspapers. Which one? All of them." Like,
oh yeah.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. You clearly have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
My house.
Yeah, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about. That's great, and it's becoming painfully obvious. So the other character in here, who right off the bat, I was like, "Oh boy, you're part of the problem and why we're in this situation right now, you fucker." This gentleman, the one who does, which I think is interesting, the advertising guy, was talking about how happy he was that he got to be in a murder trial because, boy howdy, this is way more exciting than some bank robber.
That the guy who kept taking his classes on and off?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Juror 12.
Yes.
And I'm sorry.
Who actually does, like Toussaint pointed out during our viewing, look like Don Draper. It's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
That is such a gross point of view for someone who gets called to jury duty of being.
And yet, probably a common one.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can tell all the boys at the back of the firm is like, hey, I was on a jury.
I mean, when
That-
we get called to jury duty, we all think of it as
Yeah.
a chore.
Mhm.
But I would be lying if I probably would say the opposite. Like if I, which I've never been, but if I was called for jury duty and I was called for like tax evasion versus I was called for a murder trial, I would probably be slightly more passionate about deliberating.
But that is such a.
I don't know, but I would announce that.
Weirdly
Well-
enough, I completely understand because it's something that, while it's a very heavy decision to be a part of, at the same time,
It's your civic duty.
I think there's something that I think passionate is the key word that you use, that you would become more passionate about it. You know, do I want people taking money out of the, away from me? No. But do I completely understand tax evasion? Absolutely not. I know I would not be part of
Although
that
the other
jury.
side of that coin is, if you go to a tax evasion, you could end up putting gangsters away who actually did kill people. So
That's true.
yeah. I guess my opinion on what I'm getting at is that it's just such a weird and kind of icky feeling to me to say that you feel stimulated by the fact that you get to be part of a murder trial as opposed to any other possible trial that you could be called to be part of, and that is doing it for you.
Hey, man, don't kink shame.
Yeah. But that why, like, you want to be part of a group that is either going to decide to send a man to the electric chair or send him away from the electric chair back to his freedom. And yeah, it is obviously, if you just randomly or not randomly get picked to do that, then that is just part of what your actual civic duty is. But to just announce that, yes, I would like to watch Fox News and I would like to see coverage in the war field, and yes, I would like my steak medium rare and I would like a fucking American flag in it. I don't know. There's just as soon as I heard it, I wanted to vomit in my mouth and swallow it.
Yeah.
It was ugh.
And that's your right. As an American, that's your right to swallow that vomit.
Yes.
We live in a society.
Yeah, we certainly do.
Unfortunately, sometimes.
It do be like that.
Yeah.
So, Nick, you brought up the idea of the having to turn the electricity on to get the fan to work, which I thought was very interesting because, boy, there's just not a lot of attention to detail made to this room, and yeah, I don't know. It just, maybe that's just one of those things that was 70 years ago, 65 years ago, so maybe that's just how it was then, and was something that they just didn't even consider because it was daylight out. But watching it now, I guess my opinion was, oh boy, the people who designed this whole system are just not really caring.
I would say definitely it's both an indictment of the legal system in general, which is that you shove jury members in a room, or you sequester them if it's a famous trial or whatever, and you really don't think about their livelihood and what it takes to actually.
Or who has tickets to a ball game?
Yeah. But also, I would say that that's another moment in which the abstract becomes a literal moment of manifesting the shortcomings of the system, so to speak. But I would definitely say that I totally buy it too, especially for 60, 70 years ago. But yeah, that's one of my favorite moments of all. And I especially love too that not only does he go through the motions of figuring it out, but then he also treats it like a glib joke because he's then throwing little paper mashed up balls against it, which only then end up hitting the old man, who the non-racist old man.
Have to clarify.
There's two.
Multiple old men in
and
there.
also too, it was the recurring theme throughout the viewing of this that different people would mention that they thought that old man was dead, as that he continuously was
recurring theme in our
over.
living room. You mean?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
in the actual film.
I just wanted
Oh,
to point
no.
out. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we made a lot of jokes at his.
Wilbur. I'm sorry, Jur 9.
Yeah, but I kind of love that almost visual motif in which after the Jack Warden character starts the fan, sits down, and he's throwing the paper balls up at the fan, and it hits the old guy or whatever, and he's not looking at what he's doing, and I think that is the trajectory of the justice system in a way when it comes to the jury, which is that you can. You throw something and you hope that it lands in the right answer, but in reality, it's a wild shot, and you may end up hitting someone who's innocent.
Well, and it's very, I think, to kind of piggyback off of that, it's short-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
For as much as you can't, and I think, I guess some of the blocking plays a good part in this, that you can see what you're doing, and you know what you're doing initially, but that final outcome that actually comes from throwing the ball behind your back, you can't see it once it's past your perception, and you don't know where it's going. And I think sometimes to kind of bring it to like modern issues of there are men who have been tried and they've received a guilty verdict from the jury, and it turns out that 10 years later it looks like guy's not guilty at all,
DNA and whatnot. Yeah,
exactly, that he's been exonerated.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, that's not every case,
no, but it's a thing.
But
if it exists,
truly it's a thing, and it's interesting too, because you also I think the very final scene of them all going down the courthouse steps, they are all going off to their own lives. Mm-hmm. They are very that moment in the deliberating room is such a pinprick in their lives, despite the fact that it was such a momentous moment for another individual. And yet here they are, the jurors 8 and 9, they're like, oh, by the way, my name is Davis. By the way, my name's this. And then they just simply part ways, and that's it. And I think Toussaint had mentioned it, that they're all in this room, and the chances of them ever crossing paths again is
very marginal. And even then, would they even recognize them? Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about that too. Of there's these weird, I guess there's this weird kind of etherealness about the justice system sometimes, of that it exists for that moment in time when it's so big and it's meant to have a bigger deal made of it, but we forget that happened most times, unless it's a case like OJ's where nobody ever forgets, apparently.
Well, and to go along with that, of this just being just another case, and I mean, even if maybe that he had his own thoughts on it, so that was leading to his poor presentation. But I made a comment when we started watching this film that the judge actually looked like he could give no fucks about this case at all. And not even about the case, but just about doing his job. He was kind of reading well, this is a really big decision for you, and you've got on this side and this side, and time's up, and go in there. It's this guy is just not happy.
Everything about his body language suggested that he was just done for the day, and you know what? It's just another, it's another
brick
case.
in the wall.
Yes.
Which only, I would say, makes it
not
no...
to the bedpost, and I was like, maybe not the right one this time.
But I would say the judge's body language and whatnot only makes it even more abundant as to, like, it's no wonder why this entire jury room is pretty much over this case. Like, even them, or I should say, they are victims of this system before they walk into the room.
Well, so two things I'll mention. One, I think the judge, who's probably sat on a number of cases, obviously not all of them murder cases, but just cases in general, obviously has his own opinion. And now, we have female judges, have her own opinion, whatever. But this judge seems pretty decided and probably has seen cases like this before. That who knows if he's really actually considering, could the man walk all there?
Betting on a juror number 8 in the room.
No.
Every time.
Well, he...
Juror number 8! I'll get you!
Yeah. I'm assuming when the verdict is read, and we don't obviously get to see it here, I'm assuming that he may perked up a little bit when they read not guilty and be like, oh.
Well, technically, in our legal system, we have that very weird tradition of the foreman has to write it down and give it to the judge so he gets to know the verdict before the jury reads it. Which
ruins the surprise.
I always feel like it's a weird tradition or whatever, because I'm sure there's some weird legal reason for it. But at the end of the day, I'm just like, why should... if the whole point is that they're supposed to deliberate, I feel like they should have the I don't know.
Maybe it's like really just like a bad way to look at it, but I feel like if the judge really doesn't agree with it, be like,
no,
nope.
I actually did read that that's essentially what can happen, and it doesn't really ever happen, but that
in
there's...
very rare
I was going to say, he can
cases.
invoke some kind of like, no, go deliberate more, or something like that. But that's bullshit in and of itself, because why should they have that power?
I mean, you picked the 12 jurors, and they've decided whether it took them 5 minutes or 5 days. That judge part, that was very intriguing to me, just because, not really, not caring too much about his job.
I want to make 2 comments really quickly about the staging of this movie, but specifically over by the bathrooms. 2 things. One, we mentioned the moment in which Jack Warden's character turns on the fan and throws the paper balls. I do want to point out that besides the fact that I like that moment for the kind of the way that maybe highlights the justice system and whatever, it's also just a great character moment, because it does kind of almost unequivocally state that he's still preoccupied even at that moment with baseball.
No.
And that even in that subconscious moment, he's still just wanting to throw a ball around and not really think about the case, which I love.
Yeah, he's like a little kid.
Yeah.
He's like a little kid in a grown man suit.
Yeah. And 2, the other moment is that I want to say that what I love about the production design of this room, which obviously is sparse, so it's not so much that so much thought went into it, but I do think there was a reason for every angle as to what you can capture and whatnot. And one thing I loved about this is that almost every time we see a person go into the bathroom, we're watching it from an angle in which you can see both doors, the men and the women, and the women's door is obviously never used. And I think that's a conscious decision to always visualize that there is a one-way track going on. While I obviously think that 12 Angry Men may be dated for its protagonist, I don't necessarily think that Sidney Lumet was unconscious of the kind of white patriarchal system at play here, and I do think, much like the victim of this piece, possibly at least, with the person on death row or whatever, that women are at least being acknowledged as someone who's being shut out of the conversation in the same way that the person on trial is in a way. So I love the fact that we always see the men in the women's bathroom in plain sight every time the men's bathroom door is used.
If I can bring something to that,
please.
It's not necessarily just about the men in the women's room and the blocking of that, but really the only time in this film that we get any mention of a woman is when we're talking about the woman who is seeing
yes.
And that, of course,
eyewitness testimony that basically is like, quote unquote, the clincher of
Yeah.
the entire
That's
case.
what
for some
really
of them.
sways
Yeah.
the majority of the room that was holding on for dear life to what the most important was that she saw it. And, you know, the obvious literal that she just made a mistake and saw something that she thought she didn't. And also, too, I mean, we talked, there's, it's a small mention of it, but the idea of, you know, it's just taken word for word that this is what she told authorities, especially in this era, I'm sure. Now, ma'am, you saw this, right? You saw that they, I think I did. We're going to write down that you saw him being stabbed by this particular person.
And when you come in, wear your glasses.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing, too. That's really the only comment, though, we really hear about her is that, hey, you know what, she's 45, she wants to look 35. And it's like, fuck.
I like how they keep basically
awful.
saying that she's an old woman, and then later on in the movie they
Yes.
say she's 45, and I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah. That.
Seriously, she's pretty much
Yikes.
dead. I mean, Jesus.
You know, life expectancy of the time.
What? No. Sam,
Dysentery.
no.
Because especially for
better.
women,
Yeah.
especially if they birth children.
Or if they're on the Oregon Trail.
If they're on their Oregon Trail.
They're
Excuse
on
me?
The Oregon Trail.
Oh,
Okay. I thought it was some sort of weird euphemism, and I was
I
like,
know, right?
Where is this
The
from?
Oregon Trail. The video game when
Yes,
you go on
Okay.
and then you
That
get
one I
dysentery
know.
and you
Yeah.
die right away.
Yeah, I thought you were going for
You
something
guys are
else.
gross.
No.
No.
That
I would
was-
never make a
that was
joke
your
like
phrasing.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Thank you. Cool.
Any hoozle.
Jeez. Moving on.
To kind of make a point about that too, it's interesting that they, and I guess both one, that she's a woman, and that the other quote unquote eyewitness is an elderly man, and that both have faculties about them that cannot be trusted. That the old man can't walk very fast because supposedly he's had a stroke. He can't move quickly. And then the woman supposedly having glasses.
And seeing through a train. I mean, I know they explicitly state like, they prove that you can see through a train, but that's a weird stretch.
It's a very weird stretch because having like been in the city and like been in buildings where like the L, is going right past, and even being the person who's like on the L train, like it's very tough to be able to kind of, figure out what you're looking at, let alone to identify something so specific. And even the sounds that the guy is hearing, like above him. Who's to say? And this was something that I thought initially when I was watching the film of, no offense, but who's to say that, the sounds that he's hearing aren't like muffled from other apartments, or the sound of something being dropped isn't something else that's dropping. Maybe it's not a dead body. Granted, if I heard that whatever sound it was, I would have been like, oh no, I'm dead.
Or what if it's his, they kind of say that there's a possibility that he was murdered at this time and then later on he heard
Right.
the sound. So what if the sound was the son coming home and then dropping to his knees?
Right.
Something like that. It's just...
Yeah. So another thing to go off of what we're talking about you were mentioning that the idea of the train going by and the woman seeing that, and they have the exhibits of how you can see through it. We're getting into a different topic here, but I think it's relevant in this film, which is the idea of the really just terrible defense attorney that this person clearly had.
Yeah.
As we see the prosecution as some sort of scientist there to say that, no, if this train is in this exact spot with this lighting, you can see through it. And the defense attorney can't even bring up that the guy can't walk 40 feet in that time period because he had a stroke. And I don't want to say that it's only because of racism, But if
Then
you
don't say it.
well, I mean,
But factors do point.
the reality is that I feel
Don't you
like
do it.
well, I mean, people like it just
Oh God.
obviously either it's A, coming from lower means, or also B, just having a defense attorney at that time that is just doing a job and maybe doesn't really care.
I think it's a combination of classism, it's a combination of racism, and it's a combination of a overworked public defender who is basically just being set up with another sort of case that presumably like he is going to fail just simply because he might be too stretched thin. I don't know. I'm only inferring from like what sort of context would sort of yield such a piss poor defense on part of the defendant. So.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
agree.
they're in trial 7 days a week,
Right.
and
Right.
the
Right.
prosecutor is in trial once a month.
That's not the other. That's
Yeah.
like they've got other cases that they got on their mind too, and there's like, oh, I can't do all the footwork like Mr. Juror number 8,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
which is fucked.
It definitely is. Like when you think about it in that. and
they have to be the ones who figure all this shit out.
Yes. and I think that brings up a good point of sort of bringing back how the judge was set up as well as how the jury came into the room initially of there were so many factors within that room, and it comes all back to like that group think idea of everything about that setting initially was setting it up, whether or not you agree, for failure in some sort of sense. But that, and it's just by, unfortunately, the system that it is, or that existed within that time, within that city, within that, I mean, that neighborhood in many ways.
Yeah, and I think that that's more of a systemic issue across the board, and not just in Main Street USA, wherever, because there's never really a
No, I mean, never
for sure
explicitly
setting.
stated. It's kind of like a Springfield, USA,
Okay,
where,
yeah.
which as a child I did not understand that there were more than one Springfield. Like I genuinely was like, oh, this is an Illinois property Simpsons thing,
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah,
but
no.
it was a little later on when I was like, oh wow, Springfield is a very popular. I mean, to be fair, that's our capital, so it's not
Yeah.
like it's whatever.
Definitely
Right.
sounds plausible.
But they're on the record saying that they chose that name for the anonymity of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that a lot of this film is poking holes in not just the idea of somebody being either innocent or guilty or potentially innocent, but it's also just bringing to light a lot of issues within our own both legal system and just our society in general.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that the film goes as deep as you could go down it either. I think it is grounded at the same time, but you could also go so many ways with it, just like the jurors do in here, where you can spout off a lot of theories and reasons, and as long as you get one person to listen to your idea and they think it's plausible, like you were saying earlier, Nick, like you can plant that seed and watch it grow and have it sway the room in a matter of 2 hours. And
Yeah.
So going on to final ratings, maybe we'll I guess start with Sam again.
Sure.
Okay.
Overall, I think I personally like the film. It's something that I do not mind watching. I find the performances of each gentleman quite impressive, as well as some of the cinematography within the film and sort of the setting of everything. There's a lot to discuss, and I think there's a timelessness about this piece that one way or another it will continue to be relevant, at least within the society that we have, and by the judicial system that that currently exists.
So let's check in after democracy collapse.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think there's something interesting. I think there's not just something, but I think there's quite a few points about it that make it interesting, no matter when you watch this film. I'm sure that individuals who watched it when it debuted probably saw very different components of it than, we do currently sitting here.
Yeah. And they're probably dead, too.
Wow. Okay. I know people who were born in the 50s who are still alive.
But hug them.
Okay, boomer.
She's my grandma. Okay. But I think there's a number of things about this piece that that kind of are well done, and even if sometimes it seems like, well, that's a bit shaky of like a camera movement or something like that, I think there's something about it that I would not want to see it redone. It's good just the way it is, and there's good discussion that can come out of it as well, which I enjoyed. So overall, I liked it, and I would give it a 3.5 out of 5.
I also very much enjoyed this film. I would go so far as to say this film is a classic. I enjoyed all the performances in it. I enjoyed the cinematography. I enjoyed the setting. But most of all, I just enjoyed the themes, and I also just really like the dialogue. I think that there are a lot of really strong moments in this. And yeah, I feel for juror number 3, even though I think he's an asshole. And I think that's
And then he's wrong.
That's a powerful
ability to make me feel like I don't fucking like that dude, but I feel bad for that dude at the same time. Like,
that's also nice in the current climate that we live in.
Right.
That you could see somebody be like, that guy is a real dickhead, but at the same time, he seems like he's genuine at least.
Yeah, he's genuine at least. Yeah. But yeah. I think I would give this one of my rarest 5 out of 5s.
Ooh.
Wow.
It's a good movie.
Well,
laying down the gauntlet here.
Hello. I would also give this a 5 out of 5. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh boy.
I feel like I need to change my rating now.
No. This has been a movie that I've adored for a long time, and it's very much up my alley in that I love movies that are very kind of play-based as far as having a very single setting and having characters just duke it out verbally. And
it's a very Greek setting.
Oh, yeah. And I absolutely love this. I love the performances. I love the way that the ideas are exchanged. And you can honestly feel this story's influence all over. There have been countless properties that have essentially done. There are 12 Angry Men. There was an episode of The Good Wife, which is a lawyer show, but there was one episode where you don't actually leave the jury room, so a clear inspiration there. Or like the Batman 3 comic issues arc, which I mistakenly said was a Penguin, but was actually Mr. Freeze. I looked it up in the meantime.
Boy, it's tough because it seems like Mr. Freeze would come across as guilty since he has to wear the whole get-up and everything.
That is true. It was a weird case. It wasn't like his main thing, so to speak. But I sincerely recommend that 3-issue arc. I'm looking at Tucson because he reads comics.
I do. I will look it up.
But there are countless other examples. I want to say a Veronica Mars episode did a similar thing too. But this is all over. It's just like kind of Rashomon in the way it's formative in the way that you can take the structure and the DNA of this story and you can really implant it into so many other properties that are long-standing.
You can never have seen this film and still recognize the plot.
Yeah.
From simply like piecemeal of other forms of media that have sort of taken after it.
Absolutely. And I love the story, and the way that I think moving forward we can truly kind of reckon with it is that I'm of two minds, which is that if you're gonna go see it like on a theatrical, production of it and whatnot, obviously you should watch the film. But if you're gonna, because there's some great theatrical productions as well. Like on the one hand, I would not want this to be rewritten. I'm of two things, which is that I wouldn't want this to be essentially done with the same script, only inserting women or people of color into these characters without rewrites, because I think that kind of blind casting is what they call it, is actually more offensive than actually coming up with ramifications and or trying to at least come up with lived experiences that are specific to these POVs or whatnot. But there are so many different ways you could take this story and rewrite it into this day and age that I would love to see people do. I mean, while we were watching it, I could think of a million different ways you could make this, and I don't mean this as like a cutesy whatever, but like as a Me Too production, where what if this is a rape case? What if there are women on this jury? And what if men and women are differentiating on what constitutes as rape? Like, that is what is happening now. Not that it should have to be happening now, but that is what's happening now. And I would love to see someone try to tackle that in the same manner within these four walls. So I absolutely love 12 Angry Men by Sidney Lumet, and I think it's one of the finest films ever made.
Oh. Well, that is a resounding positive review. So very good stuff. I am a big fan of this film. Again, this was my first time, so I definitely would want to sit down and investigate this again for a second time at some point. But at the same time, I give this a 4 out of 5, as I think this is a very, very solid film that has really strong acting and really strong writing and characters throughout. And a lot of the other elements that are here, including the cinematography, and also the lighting here. And I think, again, this is something that's probably just of its time, although I did make mention that the black and white is definitely an effect that has aged well just because of the story content here. But also, too, just the lighting that goes through here. Like when the storm is coming in and it's getting darker and they have to turn the lights on, like it feels legit. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like now where there would be some terrible color grading in the sky that you can see through the windows. So it actually does feel darker.
It gives the whole piece, it has to have a real-time feeling, which is the idea that there is no unbroken moment. While you can cut from shots to shot, we shouldn't be literally missing a moment. So the idea that we start at one point of the day and we get to another point is usually only evoked by the passage of the sun or whatever. So I'm glad that they went all out and did a storm and everything.
Yeah. So I thought that this was very well put together and definitely an interesting film, thought-provoking film at the same time, and also an entertaining film too, because you do see some very passionate performances, which even though I kind of pointed and laughed at a couple moments, because yes, it's just a bunch of guys sitting around being like, what are you talking about? We're talking about a man's life here, but really I'm talking about my child. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why are you screaming and why are you talking about your own child? That's fine. But at the same time, I think of this era, this is landing on a lot of these actors who were giving these kind of Grand Avast performances.
I abandoned my boy.
Yes.
I abandoned my child.
I'm sorry. Daniel Day-Lewis would knock the fucking shit out of Juror 3.
Yeah, he would.
That'd be pretty great.
Yep.
But to tie it into what you're saying, though, as far as these kind of performances, like, to tie what I was saying into what you're saying is that, like, that's why I could actually see something like I had mentioned the Me Too kind of version of this, because when I see stories come out about events and whatever, I see a lot of males who get outraged despite the fact that they're in no way involved with the story and probably as bad as whatever the story is, but probably bad enough where they're outraged because they're upset about the insinuation that quote-unquote man has the capacity to do these things because they only look at it through the lens of their own lived experiences, and that's the failure of them and of the system in teaching them that empathy comes from outside and not from within. But anyway, I'm with you in that it's both this weird thing that's dated in the sense that it's so much a product of its time in the style of acting, but I totally buy the emotions behind it.
Very good. So if you out there have any thoughts on 12 Angry Men, the Sidney Lumet version, or just that story in general, you can always send them on to us at filmtankshow@gmail.com, or you can also find us on Facebook or Twitter at filmtankshow as well. Coming up on our next episode, myself and Nick will be joined by our friend Dan.
I got confirmation that he will be here.
Oh, fantastic. I assumed he would,
Yeah.
but that's good that we now have it confirmed that he'll be here.
Boom.
And we're going to be talking about one of the definitely highest rated and also most positively reviewed films of the year.
The fact that it's coming to our local theater and we don't have to go to Evanston to see this foreign language film, I think says a lot about it.
Yeah. And that is the new film by Jun Honbong, which is Parasite. He directed a film a couple years ago called Okja that apparently is quite good.
Yeah.
I've never watched it, but I've heard it's pretty good. And for a lot of other people, the film that did have a little bit more mainstream attention from 6 years ago now. Yeah. The film that myself, Nick, and Toussaint actually all saw in the theater while we were going to Aurora University, and that was his previous film, Snowpiercer.
Yeah.
So, have you ever seen that?
I have.
Ah, yeah, that film's fucked up.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, babies taste best.
Yeah, that is the breadwinning line from that.
Yeah.
Also, to Ed Harris making the reasoning for why he has it harder than the people who are literally eating each other in the back. It's cold up here. It's like, oh boy, oh Ed, you and your fucking whatever his name. Grand Wizard Snoke from Star Wars. That's what that robe looks like.
Yeah.
That's not the.
That was before Snoke, but yeah.
that's true. Snoke was based off of him.
It's cold in here.
It's cold in here, don't you know? Stupid girl. Anyways, the film is Parasite, and again, it is getting glowing reviews by both critics and just fans who are going to see it.
Yeah.
A lot of whom are cinephiles.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like just from gathering, from looking on the interwebs a little bit, there have been just, everyday film viewers who went to go see it and have positive reactions.
Yeah.
So, yep. So, looking forward to seeing the film and talking about it.
Very least, it looks like it will spark a discussion.
Yep. So, something to look forward to coming up on episode 209. Sam, as always, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
You're very welcome.
I won't speak for the other guys, but we really enjoy having you here again.
Thank you.
You did. You spoke in the plural singular. I was like,
Yes. I meant we in
the royal we.
Okay.
Aww.
That was great.
It was great.
Wait, do you guys use the royal we, like the phrase, as like a thing, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, see,
Yes.
I do as well, and I brought that up at work the other day where I said, oh, I meant like the royal we. Now, I know it's slang, so to speak, but like the person genuinely had no idea what I could possibly mean by this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I think it's used often enough that it's kind of become part of our colloquial.
I have no idea what the fuck you guys are talking about.
Maybe if you remember watching The Big Lebowski, then you would remember the royal we.
Is it in there?
Yeah, it's in there.
I can't remember that. I just know.
I think it's the one film that I remember where they actually cite the royal
Can
we.
you guys help me out here a little bit? Or
So, well, I'm going to be bad at explaining it.
Yes,
so I think
please.
Toussaint. No, I'm saying I think you should.
Yeah.
Because when I tried to explain it to my coworker, they didn't understand what I was going for.
It's when you use we collectively in the way that it denotes something singular.
When you're speaking for other people, even without necessarily like ascertaining their inclusion in it, so to speak.
Okay.
And it started, or I should say, it originated as an actual royal thing,
yeah.
which is that the monarch, like in
Speaks for.
Britain, would
So-
use
the
it.
country.
But it's been adopted as the royal we. Like, yeah, we all think this.
I actually use it. Actually, now that you're mentioning it, I actually use this quite often in a condescending tone when talking about things that are happening at the workplace. And I'm saying, no, that's what we think.
Yep.
And meaning that that's what upper management has decided, and clearly now everyone thinks that.
And I think that's the thing, is that most people actually do use it, but then when I had at least said the phrase, when I meant the royal we, whatever, the person I was talking to just did not make the correlation between just the very simple concept and this proper noun that I had ascribed to it, even though it's not me, it's a thing. But anyway.
Okay. The more you know. I've learned something today.
There you go.
Which is good. I've learned something and seen 12 Angry Men for the first time. It's been a good day.
Yeah.
And I got to hang out with all you folks. So,
Meow.
wee
Meow, meow, meow.
Royal wee. Can't use it like that.
Nah,
It's
probably
fine.
not.
Okay. So, from Sam Shamara, Toussaint Egan, Nick Cheney, and myself, Alex Diekman, thank everyone out there for listening to us here at Film Tank. And we'll be catching up with you next time.